Hello, this is Brian of Tavarin Games, and as I've put up a first look at the game I'm working on, Littlevale, I figured I would start making development logs to keep everyone updated on what I'm working on in the game. Now, I am a hobbyist game developer, self-taught in coding and everything, so I know my code is not going to be perfect. There's definitely things that could be improved in the way I write code and how I make games, so keep that in mind for any time you're looking at this. But getting into it, this is the game itself. I'm working on it in Unity. It's fully open world, so you can see the map here. You can see where it ends, and I haven't built up yet, and places I'm working on. So it is all very much a work in progress. Now, over the last 2 weeks or so, I have added in a new character. So this character is Belle. So the first thing to do was to make this sprite art for her. You can see that my sprite sheets for the NPCs are pretty simple at this point. I just have idle sprites, walking sprites here, sitting sprites, and sleeping sprites. I do plan on adding further sprites for each NPC, so work-based actions, hobby actions, other things they can eventually do. But for now, I've just got these sort of basic actions for each of the NPCs. And then we also have an icon for the character. Eventually I do want to have multiple icons for each character with different expressions. For now I'm just doing one basic icon for each character. So that's the sprite for Belle. Getting her into the game, first I did make a house for her. So she lives here next to the theater where she works. And you can see her here. Now, the NPCs are made up of an NPC object and then a sprite object and the shadow underneath. With the NPC object, this is kind of the main part, there are 4 main scripts. So I've got a general NPC script, which I've written, and that controls all the actions of the NPC, so how they actually go about functioning. There's also the NPC dialogue script, and this is how it controls how you interact with the dialogue. So this is where the dialogue's being displayed, the responses are being grabbed, and the controls for interacting with the dialogue are established. We also have a general controller script that is unique to each NPC. This is basically just a schedule for the NPCs that then the NPC's general script will use to figure out what behaviors they're supposed to be doing and when. And then a dialogue script that's unique to each character that literally just saves all of the dialogue options and possible responses. So we can look at that, the actual code for that. So the general NPC script is pretty long, but it's taking in the update the various behaviors they can be doing, figuring out how to go about doing that code-wise. As I said, there's definitely things I can improve in how I write my code, but it works pretty well. The dialogue script itself is pretty simple. So in the update, we have the different controls you can do, how to grab responses, and then how the conversations start and displaying responses to the player controller script. And then, yeah, the dialogue itself for each character right now is pretty basic. I've only given each character a dozen or so unique lines of dialogue. So it's really not that much. I do plan on writing quite a bit more. The other thing we have is this choose dialogue function, which right now you can see is really short. It's just, at the moment, grabbing one particular line of dialogue to start either you haven't met them yet, which is 0, or you have met them already, which is dialogue option 1. I do plan on expanding this as you build your relationship more, like it will go into more familiar dialogue options and different things you can say, pursuing relationships, adding in different quests you can do for the characters. But for now, it's still pretty basic. And then, so as I mentioned, the controller, this is how it's determining what the NPC is supposed to be doing and when. So we're looking at sort of the time of day and then days of the week and figuring out, okay, what is this character supposed to be doing? In which case it sets their desired behavior. In many cases, the direction they're supposed to be facing when they get there. This little chunk is just for the pathfinding script. So anytime they have to go through a single door that might be blocked, the pathfinding script would fail or might try to run for too long and start to freeze the game. So this little this information tells the pathfinding script if there's anything in these tiles that would be blocking the door and preventing the NPC from pathing, wait a few seconds to then retry to path once the door is clear. That type of thing. And that's not always necessary. Sometimes they go from one location to another where there are no doors or single barrier or single path barriers in the way, so they don't have to worry about running into things. They can always path around whatever might be in the way. Yeah, and on that, they actually do have a pathfinding script, which is somewhere in here. If you look at all of my annoying scripts. So pathfinding script I wrote myself. It is certainly not the most efficient pathfinding script. It works. It does the job. It's node-based, so we have all these nodes around town to shorten the pathing that the NPCs can take. So if the final destination is quite a distance away from where they are, it will instead find a node between them that's most convenient to go to, path to that node first, so it's a shorter path it has to calculate, and then it will continue along from the nodes until it can find the destination within about, I'm using 30 tiles of distance in the game. But it's not an efficient pathfinding script. I didn't know how to write a pathfinding script. I kind of just guessed on how to write it, and it does work. It doesn't work for distances greater than about 50 tiles. It really slows the game down. But if I keep the distances shorter, it works quite fine and efficiently. So that's kind of how Belle's in the game, and all of her basic behaviors are in and written, and she has a nice little house. Other thing I did is some bug fixing. So in one of the characters' behavior scripts, having to fix some bugs where they weren't choosing a behavior and were just sitting still all weekend because I just screwed up the dates. And then another thing I did, if we actually play the game and we just chuck through Maurice's dialogue real quick once he starts. So in the movement script, it's tile-based movement. So your character will always land specifically on a tile. So it's not free movement like in many games. I was more inspired by older games like the Harvest Moon on Game Boy Advance and the old Pokemon games. So you always end up squarely on a tile. Now the thing is, I want the character to be able to stand in place and turn. So what I was doing before is if you clicked an arrow key for a short amount of time, it would then turn the character before it started moving. Now I found that if that time was too long, it felt like the movement was really delayed. Anytime you wanted to change direction was a really slow process and very noticeable. But if I made that time too short, any click would cause the character to move over a tile, which might not be what you want to do. If you want to face down while standing in this tile, you really couldn't. You'd end up moving down one tile instead, which removed the whole point of having this tile-based movement, which is to have that sort of accuracy when you're building and planting crops and everything. You always know exactly what you're facing. So in the script, and I've also added in, alongside that little bit of a delay of transferring your control to actual movement if you're moving into a new direction, is another little bit of delay right here, where if your character has only moved a small bit of the way into the new tile, it actually gets moved, and you let go of the key, it gets moved back to its previous tile. So this allows it so that if you hold the key for just a little bit too long while trying to turn your character, you get chucked back into the tile so that you don't accidentally walk into that new tile. Now, sometimes you can see it animates a little bit like that. That's something I still have to fix. But overall, it lets you turn in place pretty well without too much. There's still some fine-tuning you have to do, but it does make the movement a lot smoother. So there's not very much delay between when you want to change direction and the character actually moving in that direction. Alright. So another thing I was working on was making it so that you can have different colored beds. So before I only had this blue cover on the bed, and that was kind of boring. Every single bed in the game was blue. So I added in a script, and it looks kind of funny when you're not playing the game because I've been lazy about setting up the sprites, but I actually split the bed sprites into a basically body of the bed here. Actually, if we look at it in the sprite editor, so we have the body of the bed, and then we've got, as a separate sprite, the cover. Now, I do plan on adding more styles of beds and making like fancy beds and different kinds of beds you can buy. For now, we just have the one type. But by splitting the cover, and then if we look at the bed object itself, so we have this preform. So we have the bed object, which has the collider, and it has a script for that, which selects which sprite it should be using. Now, there's quite a few sprites because I made it so if you put two beds next to each other, they actually connect into a single larger bed. I found that was just sort of a bit easier to work with in my object placement code of not trying to place a object that takes up 4 tiles and like buying a big bed. This way you just connect 2 beds. And you can also have the cover split, so one cover red, half the cover red, half the cover blue if you want. But yeah, so that's holding that. And then the cover itself is a separate object that has this new little bed cover script. So it holds the cover sprites, And then the script itself is literally, it's very short. It just has the different colors it can be. So I've programmed in 7 colors for the bed. I'll add more in the future. And then all it's doing is it's just looking at the item script that picks which sprite it should have based on the direction and whether the bed is currently doubled with the one next to it. And this just then matches the sprite of that. And if the color needs to be changed, it then just changes the colors. So it only checks this if the color is actually changed. This usually only fires when the bed is either placed into the game or when a save game is loaded. This shouldn't really fire at any other period. But so now we have the 7 different colored beds, so you can actually add a little bit of variety to the. So I could add a bit of variety and make different colored beds instead of just everything being blue. Oh, I forgot to do the ones down here. So that's one thing. So I also had to accommodate that in the save script. So as is sort of pointed out in my first look video, I wanted this to be a game where you could save and load the game anytime, anywhere. You don't have to play out the night and save it when you go to bed and sleep, a la the old Harvest Moon games and Stardew Valley. That way, you know, if something comes up, you can just save the game and leave. And you can go back to it at any time. So the save script ends up being a little complicated as a result. But for the beds, I literally just had to figure out what is the actual ID of the bed to save the color. Because the way the beds actually work is, as you can see, the bed is just called bed. When it's placed in the game, its object name is just bed. It has actually no ID. The ID is stored as the color. So what it actually does is it basically saves the color as a preference into that cover script here, this color. So that's actually the ID of the bed. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So when it has to save the game, it's going to not just grab the name bed, which would ID the object, this is a standard bed, but then it also adds in that color variable at the end. So that way when it saves the game, it knows this is the color of bed it's supposed to be. And then if we scroll all the way down, you can hear that to the loading, it then will, so it has that saved color and makes that the number of the bed. So then it can actually load the correct color of bed when you save the game, and you won't end up having your purple bed turn blue or something. All right, so I also was basically working a bit on furnishing up people's homes. So there's not a huge amount of furniture in the game yet. Like we have one type of couch, one coffee table, one type of standard like small table and big table, 2 TVs, a dresser, bookshelf, and some kitchen furniture. So I'm still working on adding in different types of furniture. But, you know, I added in dressers recently to the game, so I added those to the different NPCs' houses, some chairs here and there, just to make things feel a little bit more lived in. I've got this office desk and office chair now in the game, so I placed those in some of the houses, and you know, just to make the people's houses look a little nicer. And as I'm adding furniture to the game, I'm going to be replacing the furniture in the houses and trying to make each one feel a little bit more unique. And you're getting my stupid email notifications, which I should have turned off. Anyway, the other thing that was I fixed this week, so I found an interesting bug. So I found if an NPC was standing right next to their bed and they were and they were supposed to go to sleep, they actually weren't. They were just standing in place and not starting to sleep in their bed. But if they started anywhere else, they would then perfectly path to this location beside the bed and go to sleep. So I found that bug in the code in the actual NPC's controller, if we go into the sleep, where it wasn't properly finding, like if the NPC when it first loaded was already in its location, it wasn't registering that it was in that location, that it was in the correct location to go to sleep, and was just trying to path to it over and over again and failing because it was already in the correct spot. So I just had to add in a new little bit of code that then tells it, you are in the right spot, please go to bed, in here. So that made sure that that was fixed, and now they actually do. When we load the game, Belle here, who when the game starts actually goes straight to sleep, successfully does it. And if you save the game in the middle of the night, it actually doesn't load the NPCs on the bed because that creates collider issues. It loads the NPCs back beside the bed, and then they put themselves back to sleep once they load into the game. So with this bug before, if you save the game at night when all the NPCs are supposed to be sleeping, they'd all just end up standing next to their beds and not actually going to sleep, which was kind of funny. But yeah, this little fix definitely fixed that. So they're working a lot better now. Another thing I did was in the behavior scripts of all the NPCs, and we'll just look at the Belle controller for that, is sometimes they have sort of multiple activities they can do, and they sort of just choose one at random, where they can say, in this case, they can either go like practice singing or they can watch TV during this time window. Now, what was happening is I didn't have this option chosen variable. So it was, if you ignore that and just look at this, what was happening is it would just, every hour, it would check this and recheck what the NPC is supposed to be doing. And sometimes it would pick the other option, a different option. So the NPC might end up wandering around town back and forth between 2 locations or 3 locations because they keep redeciding what they're supposed to be doing. So for each NPC, I've just added this option chosen variable that if one of these options hasn't been chosen, you pick one. And then once that is triggered as true, it doesn't check, it doesn't try to redo this behavior. It then sticks to that behavior until the next time in their schedule when they go to do something else. And then at night when they go to bed, it then just it resets that variable so that on the next night they can then choose a different option again. So this is in a few different places where the option chosen is used just to make sure the NPC stays where they are. When, say, they go to the pub, they actually stay there for the time I want them there. And this also allows a little bit of variety in what the NPCs can do. I don't want them always, every single Tuesday, this NPC goes to this location. I want it so that they have some choice. And as I add locations to the town and things that you as a player and that the NPCs can do, I'm going to be updating these behavior scripts and letting them get going into multiple places. So they might go to the theater, maybe I'll add a museum and they'll go there, or they go to the library or the park or the restaurant, the pub, the observatory. Like, I want them to be able to go to different places and sort of start to and have a bit of randomization to their personalities so that they're not always just in the same place at the same time. And then, so the next thing I had updated was adding in wall paint. So you can see like the old walls I did, basically they were colored sprites. So you can see in this tile map, I have each wall was made with color. So we have these wooden, brick, barn walls, and these sort of marble walls, concrete walls. And so you basically had one choice of wall color, like limited choice of wall color. Well, what I wanted to do is to make it so that you can actually paint your walls. And we'll actually play the game, get the game playing. Show you. So we sort of have this wooden wall. The default color isn't actually exactly the same as the original sprite art. But what I did is, I actually should have shown you this before. If we look at the sprites for this, I have the regular walls, and then I made these black and white versions. So this would be the brick wall, the regular one, and the black and white one. And same thing with the wood walls, the regular original color, and this black and white version. So that means that I can apply a color to it using the sprite renderer. So taking advantage of that, we can go up here to the building store, and we can go shopping. So if we scroll down to the bottom, it takes a little while. So we have cans of paint. So let's paint our walls red. I think that would be fun. So we'll just buy a bunch. Each can of paint paints one wall section. So just to make it easier for me. So like you don't buy a can of paint and then I have to track that this has 20 uses. Each one just does one wall section. So let's purchase that. And I should probably rearrange that store a bit so you don't have to do that weird little hook turn to get around. So we have the paint in our inventory. If we stand next to a wall with paint, press space, poking the mic, it will actually color the wall a new color. So now you can add a little variety in that. So this way, like I haven't done any patterns because that would require different sprite art to be made that can be pasted over the wall, and then that comes up with its own complications. I might do that at some point. For now, I'm just going with this wall paint that lets you change the color. Actually, if we want to get there, we have to move our toilet. Put that toilet back. Yeah, so you can paint the walls. Now, if we save the game, and then let's just move it and then load it so we can prove that it loads, you can see the wall color stays the same. Oop. Don't know why the door closed on us there. So that also required a little updating in the save load script because each wall now needs to know its color, which is set as a variable in the wall itself. If we look at the building resources into the wall, so we can see that we have the different elements of the wall at the moment. So this is where the color is being applied, so we can make the color whatever we want. Change that up so now the walls can be whatever, which is nice. And then the color is actually just set as a variable in the wall script for each individual wall to keep track of that. So the default for the wood walls is 9, which is that sort of light brown. So I gotta open the walls script. So if we look at that, we just have, here's the different color options I've added so far. I will be adding more in the future. For now, we just have these, this starting batch of colors. So the default color is a public integer, so I can set that in the game editor and not have to do it in the code. So each wall type can use this same script. And then I just change this, the default value in the game editor for each wall type's resource game object. And then we store the old color of the wall. And then when you paint the wall, it just changes the color variable to whatever the paint color is supposed to be. And then this old color here, which would then no longer match, would trigger this, which then just recolors the wall, sets the old color, and tells it, okay, stop trying to recolor the wall. We don't need to paint it every single frame. And then this is just the update sprite, which actually just picks which sprite you're supposed to use based on which walls are around it. So that required saving as well. So in the save load, we have all this load game into the save game. I just added in this little thing for the wall, where in the additional data for it, it saves the color of it. Actually, we can delete this debug. I just wanted to make sure it was correctly saving that. And then when we're loading, once again, we find the wall, which is just here. And once again, this doesn't need to be here. It then just loads that, the additional data as the proper integer and sets that into the color script right away. So it can save and load it correctly. Now, when you actually tear down a wall, it removes the paint. So if you want to take the paint off a wall, you just pick it up and replace it, and that gets rid of the paint. But yeah, paint color is not preserved once a wall is picked up, just to keep it easier in the item management of the game. By saving it as just a single variable, I don't have to create a different resource object for each wall. Whereas if I wanted the color to stay once you pick it up, each different wall color would have to be an actually separate object of the wall. And that gets a little more difficult to deal with. And then, so the last thing I sort of worked on, which I did yesterday, was something for the NPCs. Actually, we'll go back here. So if the NPCs go to a location such as the town pub here, or up into the theater here, I had it so that anytime the NPCs were picking a location, they had a set chair that they went to. So say Belle would come in and sit here, and Alec would come in and he would always sit at this chair. And I was having to keep track of which chair they're sitting at, and it would mean that anytime they were in the pub, they were always in the same location, which would kind of look weird. And it was the same sort of for the theater. So I wanted a function where the NPCs would actually walk into the location they're supposed to go to, determine where all the available chairs are around them, and then just pick one at random and go sit in it. So it is random at the moment. So they don't have any plans of, oh, is there a person here I can sit next to? So the first thing is in the behavior script, here in the controller, I added this behavior called find seat. So the behaviors for them are stored as strings, and then in the NPCs, we just look at what does the string say. I know I could be more efficient by using just integers and save some memory, but that is much harder to read. This way, find seat. We know exactly what they want to do. They want to find a seat to sit in. So in the NPCs, if they're looking to find a seat, we trigger this new function, which I called find chair because I am inconsistent, and it should probably have called them all find seat or find chair, but whatever. What it does is it grabs basically all the chairs within it and then determines which ones are within a set distance, which can be set here. So that determines they're only looking at the chairs within the desired location. It then basically so it takes a list of those and it picks one at random. And then it checks at that one, is anything sitting in that chair already? And which it's actually doing here. It's making sure the chair is actually empty. And then it's looking at random one of those chairs and then looking at the tiles around it, the 4 locations around it. So if it was looking at this chair, it'd be looking at this space, this space, this space, and this space. And it's seeing, is any of those spaces open that I can actually path into? There are actually chairs in the game that you can't path to. Like this chair here, it's blocked on all 4 sides. So, and same with this one. So really, these shouldn't be here because you can't actually get to them. The NPCs cannot sit in those chairs. So that's something I got to fix. But it's looking at those, and if it finds that open space, it then goes, okay, I can sit in that chair, and it sets So I have this, again, a debug because I had that this week, just to let me know that they actually were finding it correctly, if we can get rid of that. But it says, okay, we found an open space. Let's get out of this loop. Let's set the desired location to be that open space next to the chair. Set the desired behavior to be sitting in that chair, and set the current behavior to idle. Because the NPCs won't start repathing if their behavior is still in this sort of fine seat. It wants the behavior to be idle before they start pathing. So this just has to set the behavior back to idle, and then they'll go about doing it. So then they'll happily path to the random chair they've picked and sit down in it. So that way, hopefully, sort of when you're visiting around town, you're checking different places, the NPCs are sort of in different locations each time to add a little bit of more variety and a little bit more life to the town. Just try and make it feel a little more alive. And you can see these places. So this is the blacksmith shop. I haven't actually made any of the sprite art for their shop yet. And this is meant to be the veterinarians. And again, I'm missing a whole bunch of sprite art that I haven't made yet. But this is where you go to buy pets and pet food and pet supplies. And eventually I might add in animal illnesses and treatment options, which you would then go to here for. But that would be a ways away. Right now you can buy cats, eventually dogs, and their food and pet beds. And then the blacksmith shop's where you buy tools. So still got to build that up. So you can see there's still a lot to add to the town. It's still pretty empty, but it's getting there. And thank you for watching if you got this far. If you want to support development of this game, you can support me on Patreon. There will be a link in the description.